I want to dedicate what I'm going to say to George, of course, our friend George, who was my dear friend and who did know a good fight when he saw it, and sometimes the fight was with me. So we had our disagreements. I want to begin with a poem. I also dedicate the presentation to my husband, David, who, of course, was an activist all his life. And he will also come up in the speech because I benefit daily from also his example as well as from George's mentorship. These were two people in my life that were, for me, examples of how to be a local activist, how to be locally focused, how to be very focused and yet have an extremely broad horizon, not to just take on the issue du jour, so to speak, but to really have a broad horizon and then focus on something that you think you can make a difference in. And I want to read a poem to you, because I know this is organized by the FOR, and I think this is a great poem. If I knew how to sing it, I'd sing it, but I don't know the melody to it. This is from our hymn songwriter Brian Wren, who writes a lot of hymns and who also, you can sing most of them. This one has a melody that I do not know, that's not familiar. So this is how it goes. It's about peace. It's a poem about peace. I need some water. I will need water. Is there water there? So this is how the poem goes. Say no to peace if what they mean by peace is the quiet misery of hunger, the frozen stillness of fear, the silence of broken spirits, the unborn hopes of the oppressed. Tell them that peace is the shouting of children at play, the babble of tongues set free, the thunder of dancing feet, and a father's voice singing. Peace is a tree growing from the soil of justice, watered by the rain of love. Say no to peace if what they mean by peace is a rampart of gleaming missiles, the arming of distant wars, money at ease in the castle, and grateful poor at the gate. Tell them that peace is the hauling down of flags, the forging of guns into plows, the giving of fields to the landless, and hunger a fading dream. Peace is a song playing to the pipes of freedom, swinging to the sounds of love. I think that George would be wholeheartedly in tune with that poem. And you know, George had great rhetorical gifts, in my opinion, and could read a great poem from time to time that I still recall. I've quoted some of them, and I just wanted to do that, to set my speech off as to what is peace and what is not peace, because I think that Brian Wren there has an excellent thing going and a very good construction of what peace means. Now, I know we're all worried. And Occupy Wall Street and Occupy Louisville is all a sign of how worried people are and how they are resisting what is happening. I am dreadfully worried. I've lived here in this country for 45 years, and I don't think I have ever been as concerned as I am now. Now, I'm worried about the depressing economy, as I know you are too, but that's not what I want to talk about. There's a stunning disparity in income in this country that was just revealed by the Congressional Budget Office figures. I'm worried about the rapacious healthcare industries, which in the same period as those disparities arose made profits exceeding $7 billion in the first half of 2011. But although I worry about these things, I worry about these and other problems that beset our communities continuously. But what worries me right now and what I want to talk about with you is something else. My husband David, who died in February, to my great loss, and I thought when Pat was mentioning that I had to revise the Vita. It's the first time I had to do that, to write David out of it, because he was, of course, listed there as I'm married to David Bos, the Presbyterian minister, so I had to revise that and mention David's death, and that I'm the proud parent of Kim and Martin, and the grandmother of Emma Claire, who will be 9 in January. We are expecting a second grandchild, and that is another granddaughter, and so this is a tremendous sign of hope and life in our family, and I just thought I'd mention that because you mentioned my family. Now, David, who was truly a lefty, in all his life and all our early debates, you might say, were about social issues, because I tended more to the traditional side when I was young. I think that happens sometimes when you're young and foolish. And he did not stay anywhere near the center. He moved further and further left. And he subscribed to The Nation. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with The Nation. And when he died, I thought, I have to make decisions about subscriptions here. I don't want maybe this. I can't read at all. I can barely keep up with this. I have to get rid of that. And I thought The Nation would be one of them. I thought I just need to cancel that. It comes every week. There's so much in it. And to my great edification, I have kept receiving The Nation. And I even gave a gift subscription. And if somebody really wants to give subscription to The Nation, I will be very happy to give you a Christmas gift and have The Nation come to your door, because the friend I gave it to also, she can't wait, she says, for it to come and to read it. And I've become a pretty faithful reader of what it's a weekly, as time allows, as I have time for going through it. And in a column of the October 17 issue, there is a lead essay by Jonathan Schell. And this is what I want to begin with, and it's called Cruel America. He talks about a phenomenon that he watched during the recent political debates. And he describes this as a deterioration of civility and kindness in public arenas. Yeah, and I'll have to set it on the floor. There it goes. It's too cumbersome. He says that what happened, there was a speech in this context, I will cite the names. It was Rick Perry, who was talking about executions, and he was about execution in Texas, and he was asked whether he ever lost any sleep at night because at the thought that some of those might have been innocent, and he said that no, he didn't lose any sleep, he slept fine, and he said if you come into our state and you kill one of our citizens, you will be executed. And that's, when you say, oh yeah, well, that's Perry, okay, we all kind of sigh. The problem that Schell highlights here is that this was loudly applauded by the crowd. Then when the interviewer was sort of taken aback by the applause and asked Perry what he made of that everybody applauded this, he said he was undisturbed, and he repeated his threat. He said, our citizens have made it clear they don't want you to commit those crimes against our citizens, and if you do, you will face the ultimate justice. And then the second thing, because I can't read you this whole article, and I will not do that, but the second thing that he held up is this was a congressman who was asked, this was Ron Paul, who was asked, this is in connection with the health plan, what he would do, what he thinks should be done if there was a young man who had decided not to buy health insurance that was under, addressing the issue that everyone should have health insurance under the Affordable Care Act that will come into play. And what if this person went into a coma? And Ron Paul answered, that's what freedom is all about, taking your own risks. And there were cheers from the crowd at that. And he pressed on, the interviewer pressed on, and said, are you saying that society should just let him die? And someone in the audience shouted, yeah! And the crowd roared in approval. It's very interesting. I think this article is really pointing to something crucial that is happening in our society, perhaps as a result of certain other things that have happened. So what Shell points out is that the United States, he says, is traveling down a steepening path of cruelty, and he links this descent into cruelty to the steadily growing faith in force as the solution to almost any problem, whether at home or abroad. He cites in this context the raucous celebration set off by the killing of Osama bin Laden. He argues that during a descent into barbarism, which is what he calls it, there are two stages. First, there is the stage where evils are inaugurated. So evils take place. They're sort of tested. They are tested to see whether they will fly. And then second is the stage of the reaction, indignation and rejection, or actually acceptance or even delight. And the two examples that he gives are examples of acceptance, not just acceptance, but delight. And of course, we have gone a long way on stage one, beginning perhaps with the torture of terrorism suspects never repealed under the Obama administration, the decision of the current administration against calling for legal accountability of these practices, so it's just been swept under the rug. What is that practice called of having prisons abroad? The rendition system is another example of that. A despicable and inhumane criminal justice system bears no description. It would make you break down in tears. To the crushing burdens of paying exorbitantly of what should be a human right, the care for our citizens' health. Those are criminal practices. They are not good business practices. So we are sliding slowly, as Shell argues it, and he does also mention healthcare, into a society where these practices are kind of happening, and so they are a descent, as he calls it, into barbarism. George taught, and I didn't bring them with me because I had so much to tote around. One of the things George taught me is always to keep newspaper clippings. Now, I know you can also get stuff on the internet and then print it off. But I have this great little device. I have a clothespin, and it holds all these newspaper things. It's of course not effective because I have this whole bunch of newspapers, because I'm always clipping. He taught me to clip. Always he said, have your facts, have it with you, have the clippings with you. So I brought the articles with me, because if you don't have it with you, you can't shore up what you're talking about. So so this is very worrisome. This is extremely worrisome. We do well to be very worried. And worried, I think, that these things exist, but that's one thing. But why don't they raise the outcry of indignation that should happen? Why is there not more indignation? Was there not more indignation? And what do we do? How do we express our indignation? Because I'm sure that you are indignant at this. Now, I'm going to put something else together with this, because I had planned that. When Kathy called me, I found this particular issue of the nation, and I thought, I'm going to use that. And it was an issue in August because she asked me pretty early, which was wise, and it was devoted to sports. And I never read anything about organized sports. It bores me to tears. And I thought, well, that's one I can safely skip. It happened to be in a quiet moment. I was probably eating lunch, and I lay there on my kitchen counter, and I thought, maybe I better take a look at this. Who knows? They have something in there. And it happened to be one of the most fascinating issues. I read it from cover to cover because these two things actually go pretty well together. This was a gripping issue. And I want to set some of the observations about our sports-obsessed culture next to this framework of a culture of barbarism. While torture, exorbitant wealth, abject poverty, inhumane systems of incarceration, and inhumane systems of healthcare rule the day, while our infrastructures are crumbling. I cannot go home anymore to 2nd Street and my car is going like this because we can't apparently keep our streets in any kind of shape. While this is happening, the United States in its state system spend billions of dollars on subsidizing sports stadia. And these stadia are erected, we have one, of course, right here, by giving them tax breaks. So there is no revenue that comes. There is no revenue that comes from building these stadia. This is the sports issue. I also think you always have to wave them around. So this is a sports issue in August. What? Yeah, he always waves them around, right? I see all the things that I learned, and there is there is an article, and there are a couple of articles in here that I want to quote something from. The one is called "Jocks versus Pukes," and this is by Robert Lipsyte, and he says basically, this is a sports image, but it's basically how we divide our world. We divide the world into jocks and pukes. And the jocks are the people that are responding, that cohere with the myth of masculinity that pervades sports. Well, of course, this is now very opportune because of the Penn State scandal. So even more today, we can see how this happens. But he says, what's so interesting about the article is that he says these myths are inescapable in real life. So they have crept in, or they govern our societal structures. Now, jock culture is, of course, competitive. You know that. I mean, we all know that. But there are other things about jock culture. It requires submission to authority, winning by any means necessary, and group cohesion. And group cohesion you saw happening, I think, in that applauding and cheering that I read about. Lipsyte says, this plays out, this jock mentality in the culture everywhere. In business, in medicine, in law, in the academy, everywhere there are winners and losers. There are jocks and there are pukes. The pukes are the losers. The jocks, of course, are treated like stars by coach-like authority figures who use shame and intimidation to achieve short-term results. And he says what happens in our society is that our desire to belong, because we all have that desire to belong, that this desire, the drive to a sense of belongingness, is a reflection of jock culture's grip on the male psyche and on more and more women. So this is not confined to the sports stadium. This is permeating. And I think if you put that together with the culture of the descent into barbarism, the pit of barbarism, then I think you've got an extremely dangerous thing going. And one more quote from Lipsyte. This sports system has become more and more economically, culturally, and emotionally important than ever, more at service to the empire, more dangerous to the common good. And he also says it's not hard to connect the moral dots between life between the white lines on the sports field and the state of our society today. And he was not talking about that same thing that Shell was talking about, although I think it's really on the same subject. So what do we do then? So what is it? What remedies do we have? Because I don't want you to just go away worrying, although that's sometimes not the worst thing to do. What is an appropriate response? And I want to say that that's what it's about. It's not about an effective response, not first of all. Of course, we all like to be effective. We all like to also be winners. We like to have our cause, have success. But that's not the first mandate, I think. And you all probably know all of this. I don't know why you asked me to come and speak here, because I'm just saying things that you all already know. And that is that the most important thing is to think of a response that's appropriate, that is ethically appropriate. And I think, and here is where George comes in, okay, because you're thinking, well, God is probably here somewhere, but where's George? And I did call the speech God, George Edwards, and the Politics of Otherness. I think that this was so crystal clear to George, and that the appropriate response was embodied by our friend and my former colleague, George Edwards. He knew that responding to conditions that we face today demands that we take a mental stand, and we want to take a stand, and it's important, and the body is always important, and we have to show up, but it's got to be in our heads first. It's got to be in our heads, because then the body will follow. The body will do automatically, because we had already thought it out. It was already a part of our mental furniture. I think, of course, that Occupy Wall Street and all its offshoots across the nation arose out of decisions for what was an appropriate response, obviously. And it's one way to make clear where people stand in joining movements. Now, George, I think, believed a couple of things very firmly. He believed, and he said this, and I've quoted him on this, and I will quote him again on it, that humanity has only one big talent. I'm sort of revising it just a little bit, what he said. One big talent that humanity has in common, that we all share, and that is the talent for mayhem. That's what he called it. He called it a talent for mayhem. Calvin called that original sin. And George and I were, of course, both biblical scholars. So I'm going to talk to you about the Bible. You could expect that. That's what I do for a living. George thought, he believed, actually, because that's how I should say it, that the biblical text witnesses from the first page to the last page to divine intervention on behalf of humanity and the world to avert the catastrophes that would come about if this talent of mayhem just run amok. He also said that Sodom and Gomorrah, he said, was masculinity run amok. I've always loved that. That was jock culture, if you ever had it. So divine intervention, not in the sense of God smiting or coming with thunderbolts, but always trying with people to set them on a different course, turn away from their talent for destructiveness and set them on a different course, a course that would lead them to the healing, the mending of the creation. And so George, because he so firmly believed that, was always willing to take a stand against discrimination and injustice. And he did that because he thought that the God of our belief passionately opposes such situations. That's where he stood. It was for George, I think, not so much trusting that God was on his side. That's always something we like to believe, that God is on our side. It was that he wanted to be on God's side in such situations. I am firmly convinced that that's what drove him to be arrested time and time and time again, well into his 70s, perhaps even his 80s. Jean would know that better than I. But I remember one time when we'd been arrested together, and in Frankfurt, where Everett Hoffman so valiantly defended me later in the court in Frankfurt to get me off the hook there, because I had a trip abroad coming up, and that's a whole story all by itself. But George and I were arrested together, and I think a week later he called me, and he was laughing his head off on the phone and saying, "Yeah, we were on a chain in the jail, and they were trying to get us all into the elevator." And I was just envisioning all these elderly people on a chain, in the jail. And so these were always the high points of his life. And I think we celebrate that in George, and we celebrate that for a reason. He was, in that way, a great model and mentor for all of us, not for one person, for all of us, because of his convictions. His body was always there. His body was there. My husband, David, had similar convictions, and so his body was there in the lobby of the Humana building when they would not allow most of the protesters who were over 70 years old to pee, to go to the bathroom during the night that they stayed there. And someone said to me, Kay, I never thought of that. I wish I'd thought of it. You should have peed on the floor of the Humana building, because, of course, Kay was there also in that particular protest, and that's maybe what we'll do next, I would say. So I think there are still great adventures ahead, don't you think, Garrett? We could. And when things get to a desperate pass, we're still hoping to be more effective, of course, with more polite protests. But I think that is actually a really good idea that's in there. Now, the source for George's stance, for my husband's stance, for my stance, is one of belief. It doesn't have to be. I'm not evangelizing here, but that is a source. That is a source for us on the basis of which we act like we do. And because I'm a biblical scholar, I turn to Scripture for guidance, to sort issues like this out. And there is one, and I'm going to use two sources. That's the politics of otherness, the third item in the presentation. We're going to turn to the Torah, to the part of the Hebrew Bible that is called the Torah, that I have written about, of course, and have studied and teach. And I'm also going to talk very briefly about a philosopher called Levinas, Emmanuel Levinas. One of the most remarkable things in the Bible, in the whole Bible, not just in the Torah, is the demand of fair treatment of the stranger. And the stranger is kind of a catch-all word. It's ger in Hebrew. I always like to throw in a Hebrew word or two. I'm not going to test you. You don't have to remember it. But, it's nice. It's a very simple little word. The word ger means stranger. It means the person. It's a very broad category of people. It means the person who is alienated, marginalized in the society. The person, it's not just someone from a different ethnic community, although it can be that also. So resident alien is really a poor translation. It can be somebody from another town. It can be somebody from another clan, and they are called strangers. Strangers are all the people that are made vulnerable in the society because they don't belong. They might not belong because of their color. They might not belong because of their class. They might not belong because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. They might not belong because of disabilities. All kinds of varieties of people come under that umbrella of the stranger. And such a person then and now, because it doesn't make any difference, it's still the same category of people today. These are the pukes of the Bible, okay? The pukes of the Bible in the jock culture are the people that are the down and outers, the losers, the people that do not have the same rights and privileges that everybody in the society, everybody else is accorded, the winners, the jocks. Yes, I've already done, I said that here on paper. I've already now identified the pukes with the category of the stranger. Maybe I'll translate it that way the next time I'm translating a passage of the Bible. Instead of love the stranger, I'll say love the puke. And actually, the prescribed practices and attitudes toward the stranger in the Bible were unique for ancient Israel. They were unique in that context. and they are the most frequently occurring subject of any of the laws. They are the most frequently occurring subject of any of the laws. I want to repeat that because I think people forget it. It's going so far as in Leviticus. Who reads Leviticus? Who here, Dick? Do you read Leviticus? No. You a little bit of Leviticus. Well, there's some really nice parts in Leviticus. Nobody reads Leviticus because that is one difficult book to plow through, and I know what I speak of. So, in Leviticus, in the heart of Leviticus, right in the center of this really alienating, difficult book, stands the commandment to love the stranger as you love yourself. We all remember love the neighbor as you love yourself. We do not always remember love the stranger as you love yourself. There are about 40 of these regulations. The most extreme of them, you might say, are twice the commandment to love, both in Deuteronomy, also a difficult book, and Leviticus. And then there is a host of other prescriptions, things you should do, how you should protect a stranger. And on the other hand, there is the prohibition to oppress the stranger. So, they're in all the laws. They are also, of course, in narratives. They're also outside of the Torah and in the prophetic literature. I'm working very hard with my students right now to help them to see how the prophets in ancient Israel always emphasize that. You know, and we talk about modern-day prophets, who are prophets, and we name all these great examples. If we want to say that the prophets are people that put justice and love for the downtrodden. First of all, then George Edwards was a prophet, and my husband David was a prophet. And when they gave David an award that is actually on the plaque that he had, I think it's the mind of a poet and the heart of a prophet. So I'm not going to read all these quotes to you because I put them all down because you're going to say, that's not true. She's just making that up. Well, no, you're not probably going to say that because that would be so impolite. But I really am not making it up. So I have some lovely quotes here from Exodus 22, from Leviticus 19, from Deuteronomy. And that's only a very small selection. And, of course, it's also in the New Testament because when Jesus... When a Torah expert came to him to ask him and said, how do I love God and the neighbor? Jesus gave the example of the so-called Good Samaritan, which is really also the stranger. It's not the stranger sort of out there, not over the border maybe, but the stranger right next to you, the one that you are mistreating, the stranger in your own location. And so I don't think that Jesus made any changes in these requirements, that Jesus was a truly Torah-abiding Jew. And he said, of course, also, then the rulers shall say to those on the right, come you blessed of God my Maker, inherit the realm prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. And there is that word stranger again. And I think because there is a part of us, whether we are Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, Jews, whichever religion we adhere, or whether we are secular humanists, there is a part of us that knows this, that we have a talent for mayhem, but God has also planted goodness in us that we can tap into and that we can draw on. And so part of us knows where to find this and what to do. And then sometimes I think because we want to do something, we go right away to what we think is the effective response. So then we do soup kitchens, and we and there's nothing against soup kitchens. And we have shelter for the homeless, and we have drives for clothes for the poor, and Habitat for Humanity, and all of the things, all the good programs that are around. What we have to be very careful about, I think, is that in our eagerness to have an effective response, we do not keep the structures of injustice that are around intact, because those things really do not in itself stand up against what is happening in our slide into barbarism. That's simply, and you always need to give a helping hand. And I try to give a helping hand. It's not that we shouldn't do that. It never should end there, and it should always be a part of a much larger effort. And that then gets me to my second source. I don't know that George drew on this source, but I have of late in my last couple of years and want to do more with that, and that's the ideas of the French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, who is now deceased. He, and before him, Martin Buber, argued that, I have to have another page here, it's somewhere, yes, that the moral life is constituted, now this is going to be kind of mouthful, but Levinas thought that the moral life is constituted by how much one makes oneself available to the other. The first words, he said, of the morally lived life are, in French, me voici, here I am. And in Hebrew, of course, he was also a Torah-abiding Jew, it's hineni, here I am. Here I am. I think this is splendid. Levinas is, I don't know how many of you read this philosopher, he is extremely difficult. To me, he is very difficult. He's one of these impenetrable thinkers. And then sometimes he comes up with this stuff. You know that you think, yes, of course, and you think, oh, I understand that. I get that. I don't always get how he gets there. He says the words, here I am, perform the speech act of making oneself available to the other. That, I think, too, so personified George Edwards. Making yourself available to the other, even if it means being on a chain, going into an elevator with other criminals, so to speak, in a local, godforsaken jail, prison, or whatever he was in. He says that to descend from Abraham means to be inhabited by the knowledge that the human being who is truly human is obliged by the neighbor, the one who comes by, the one who passes us by, obliges us. And this is never sort of a neutral neighbor like Jenny passing me by, although you could be the stranger, but it's the neighbor in need. It is always the other, as the other has a call on us, a call on our care, a call on us to stand up against systems of injustice. And this human being sometimes that passes us by doesn't even have a voice anymore. In systems of cruelty and barbarism, the voices are often silenced. So it's not a loud voice. It's not sometimes a voice that we can hear very clearly. Levinas, this very complicated French philosopher, suggested that the entirety of his philosophy could be summarized in the words, after you. After you. You come first. And the you is always that you that has a claim on our attention. That orientation, I think, that knowing the heart of the stranger, of the vulnerable, is not so much a matter of doing something. It is a matter of getting a disposition, an inner disposition. And then when there is a call for us to do something, we will do it. The action will almost naturally follow, because when the disposition is there, the act will follow when it is necessary. So that's now what I'm suggesting, as modest as it is, because it's a modest point of view, I think. It is not a grandiose scheme, a modest point of view, that a counterpoint to our culture, our jock culture, our culture of barbarism, can be living into this orientation to the other. And that as such, And you all are examples of this. I know this, so I am preaching to the choir. You are already examples of this disposition to the other. But you need to be strengthened in that. That alone is a step. That alone is creating resistance. That alone is setting up a bulwark against what is going on around us. That alone. It sounds kind of crazy, but it's true, and I do firmly believe that. So then, when there is a day, when a day comes that we are called on to testify, you might say, to give voice to that disposition, to be out there with our bodies, to create something of what we think makes the world livable, a human world, then we will be ready to do whatever we are called on to do. And we're not going to sit down and say, oh, I have to think about that. These are the pluses. Those are the minuses. It will simply then be there for us. It will be there for our hand to do as our hand finds it to do. And I have some